Hi, good afternoon. Today is November 27th, 2025, and it is 1:15 p.m. U.S. Central Time. My name is Rinaldo J. Aguiar Marcano, and I'm recording this video from my home located at the 2302 Britton Ridge Drive, Katy, Texas, 77494. And this house is, sorry, in a gated community called Lake Pond Estates. And this is relevant because of some things that I'm going to say. And I should give you more context about the house location. It is located just 300 feet away from the house of Robert Mueller, who was the director of the FBI for several years ago. And that is very relevant to this conversation. So today, for people following this sequence of demos, I guess at this point you've seen that I've numbered the demos in a sequential order to make it easier to reference them, right? But today on this demo, I'm going to break that sequence and I'm going to arbitrarily number this demo with a different number. Okay, so this is demo D1998. Okay, and this is an arbitrary number that I'm giving to this demo to distinguish it from the other demos. And I think also the number is important, right? 1998. So this is demo 1998, and this is going to be a very short demo, very focused, and this is designed to be high level. Okay, so I'm not going to get too much into the the low level observations. It's more about higher level inferences, right? So with that, I'm going to get started. Okay. I have a list of talking points that I've prepared. Let me start by sharing my screen with you so you can see the talking points. I think it's this one. Yes. Yeah, so this demo, 1998, I'm going to talk about a topic that is abdication. Okay, and I'm going to give more context about what that means in this context. But I think it's something that I was able to see, right, recently. I mean, I guess at some level I knew it, right, but because of the data that I got from them and the technology that I've developed to decode it and understand it. But I think, I don't know, something clicked in the last few days and in my mind, and I was able to put the dots together, right? And I think, and this is a theory, of course, but it seems pretty obvious to me that this is what happened, right? So I just want to put this on the record in a way, right? And of course, I'm going to add it to the books. But the intent here is to make it very short and precise. So let me start this demo by walking you through the chain of thoughts, right? Like the train of thought that led me to see this and to connect these dots. So all this started when the First Appellate Court denied the second petition for a writ of mandamus. And this one was directed at Judge Brown. And Judge Brown is a judge that was appointed by Governor Abbott. And the judge that denied the petition also is a judge that was appointed by Governor Abbott. And both things are relevant because Governor Abbott, I reported him to the IRS in March, right? Before the child was taken. So, but I think I should say this, right? Like this was super interesting to me because the way that dismissal happened was basically they dismissed the petition based on want of jurisdiction. That means that they're saying that they don't have jurisdiction over Judge Brown, which is in reality not true because the decision that she, the that she made was related to the court 387, and they have jurisdiction over the 387, right? So her failure to act really is shielding the 387. It's not shielding herself. So they do have jurisdiction, right? But like the law can be interpreted in different ways, and they choose to interpret in that way. But it is interesting to me because I foresaw, like 5 demos ago, I think it was in demo 85 or sorry 88 or something like that, that the only way they could dismiss this procedurally would be by citing lack of jurisdiction, and that's exactly what they did. Of course, the clerk injected several different things into the docket to be able to dismiss it procedurally, but I caught them and I corrected them, right? And after I corrected those issues, those errors, quote unquote, then they had no choice but to dismiss it by lack of jurisdiction. Now, lack of jurisdiction is an interesting thing because, yes, it's a procedural dismissal, but it implies that they read the petition, right? Because they could not see, I mean, if you only read the styling of the case, the caption, right? It doesn't say Judge Brown anywhere in the caption, right? It says that inside of the petition. So although it's a procedural dismissal, it's not as shielding to them as it would have been a dismissal based on a service error, for example, right? Or something like that. In that case, they can say, we didn't even read it, right? We didn't even read what you wrote. But in this case, if they're saying that they don't have jurisdiction over Judge Brown, it implies that they read it because that is only said inside of the petition. It's not completely a procedural, it's not completely a clerical procedure error dismissal. It implies that the justices read the petition, right? And this is serious because in that same petition, it is alleged that Troy Pickett, Morgan Heibner, and ultimately the Adams law firm committed fraud against this very same court, in which the Chief Justice has a last name Adams. So it is a very serious observation that I'm alleging that the Adams law firm committed fraud against an appellate court directed by a justice named Adams. And they read the petition because they were able to determine that this was directed at Judge Brown, and yet they dismissed it procedurally without even addressing the serious allegation of fraud against their own very same court. So, I mean, this is a kill shot, right? For me, right? So when I see this, I immediately escalated the issue to the Supreme Court, okay? And I filed a petition of writ of mandamus against the lower court, the 387th. But in the narrative of the petition, I explained the situation, right? And I'm going to talk more about this is the Supreme Court of Texas, right? That I'm talking about, not the Supreme Court of the United States yet, right? But if it doesn't get resolved in the Supreme Court of Texas, I'm of course going to escalate it to the Supreme Court of the United States. And I already have the petition for writ of mandamus ready to go. It would take me, I mean, on this one story, when this happened, right? So when they dismissed the petition for writ of mandamus at the First Appellate Court, what I did in response is that I turned on the cluster, and so I've been computing. I'm not going to give too much details because it could give them an advantage, right? But I use a combination of cloud computing and in-house computing, literally, right? So I have several workstations that I use as nodes in a small computing system, distributed computing system that I built, right? These are like HP computers that I've been buying, in different weeks of the month, right? In the recent months. And with these computers, I have something like, I don't know, it's not much. It's maybe 50 cores, right? Something like that. But I built the system in a way that I can run it on the C7000, which is a cluster that has, I don't know, 600 cores, something like that, right? So what I'm trying to say is that, and this is a design principle, right, that I always apply, that I've learned from my colleagues at Google. When you design a system to scale, you always start by designing it and running it with very constrained resources, because that will force you to optimize the system, right? That will force you as an engineer to over-optimize for performance. But you have to always build it in a way that you can easily transition and switch it to a larger cluster, right, without having to change the code. So when they denied the petition for writ of mandamus, my reaction was, okay, I'm going to give them I didn't give them the 100% of the dose, right? Like I turned on all the servers, but they were working like at 50% capacity. So in reality, if I do the math, I was probably using something like, in total, counting all the computers, maybe 300 cores, right? I mean, which is a lot, right? It's a cluster, right? But I still have 50% more capacity that I can give them, right? And I'm going to use that if they deny the Supreme Court petition. But I'm not going to talk much about the Supreme Court petition because it's kind of a policy I have, right? When these things are being litigated, even if I know the outcome beforehand, I'm not going to say anything until I see the decision in writing, right? Once I see the decision in writing, I will take action. So I'm not going to get into the details about the Supreme Court of Texas, but I want to show you what is in front of the Supreme Court of Texas. I think that it's an important thing to do. Okay. Let me see. I think it's under Troy Pickett. So in the folder of Troy Pickett, actions taken to counteract the war fraud, and there is a document, which is this one, 01-25-00. No, 0, that's the first appellate court. This one that says SCOTX, that's the abbreviation for the Supreme Court of Texas. Mandamus petition B3, right? And if you open that document, you will see that it's file stamped, right? And this was stamped on the 25th at 3 p.m. And that is the case number, right? That thing that I told you, 25-1055. So it's very, it's how do I say this? It's beautiful, really. This document, when I see it, I see beauty in the document because it's simple, it's short, and it's a kill shot. Like, this is something that cannot be ignored by the Supreme Court because it touches on the most fundamental issues that pertain the roles and responsibilities of a Supreme Court. Like, they can't dismiss this easily. I mean, anybody can do anything, right? But again, I'm not gonna get into that. But I want to tell you the three. The timer. I'm gonna give you. Give you. So when you present this writ of mandamus, right? These petitions, you have to present questions to the courts that they're going to. You have to present the facts and lay out your arguments, but you have to start by presenting fundamental questions, and it has to be 1 to 3 questions. No, you cannot present 10 questions, right? I mean, you could, but it would be for the Supreme Court, right? So this is the highest court in Texas that we're talking about, right? There's nobody higher than this in Texas. The next step is the federal, so the U.S. Supreme Court, at the federal level, which would put me just one step below, right? You know who. So issues presented, right? So this document is beautiful, really. I see beauty in this, right? So there's 3 questions, right? And the 3 questions touch the fundamental, the reason for the Supreme Court of Texas to exist, right? They have to answer these questions, right? So the first question is, just gonna read the questions, right? I'm not gonna get too much into details about this case, but I'm gonna read the questions. The first question is, did the trial court commit a clear abuse of discretion by signing a substantive temporary order after a properly filed motion to recuse had divested the court's jurisdiction? That's the first question, right? Because I filed a motion to recuse, and then the trial judge, signed the fraudulent orders of Morgan Heibner after I filed the motion to recuse. They didn't have jurisdiction. So the question for the court is, was this an abuse of discretion by the trial court? The second question, and this is getting more interesting, right? Does a trial court judge possesses the authority to unilaterally grant absolute civil and criminal immunity to law enforcement for their actions in enforcing a court order? And if not, is mandamus the proper remedy to strike such a facially unconstitutional provision? Like, this is related to that clause that Morgan Heibner injected into the fraudulent order that got signed after the motion to recuse and has impossible timestamps and everything. And when I say Morgan Heibner, I really mean the Adams law firm, right? Because she's acting as an employee of the Adams law firm. So this was really done by the Adams law firm. And remember, the Chief Justice of the First Appellate Court has the last name Adams as well. It's just an observation. So in that order, created by the Adams law firm, they were purporting, saying that they were giving absolute immunity, criminal and civil, to the police, to all the police officers of Texas, for anything they could do to me while trying to enforce the child custody orders. Imagine that. So the question to the Supreme Court is if a trial judge in a lower family court has the authority to grant full immunity for acts that have not even been committed to all the police officers in Texas. I mean, if the answer to this is yes, I guess, society is over, right? And the third question is mandamus relief from this court necessary when the entire lower judiciary, the trial court, the administrative judge, meaning Judge Brown, who was appointed by Governor Abbott, and the Court of Appeals, which is directed by Chief Justice Adams, who was also appointed by Governor Abbott, has systematically refused to provide the relator a hearing or an adequate remedy for a void order that violates his fundamental parental rights. And this is a constitutional issue, right? Which is right, on the game park of the Supreme Court, right? Because they're seizing my child, right, with this fraudulent order. And the common thread on all these lower courts, meaning the 387th, the 11th administrative court district, where in which the presiding judge is the Honorable Susan Brown, and the First Appellate Court, in which the Chief Justice is the Honorable Terry Adams, right? And the last two that I mentioned were appointed to the bench by Governor Greg Abbott. So the reason for that third question is this, right? This part of the argument, the number 3. The denial of a hearing is a denial of due process. During all this saga of 8 months, none of these 3 courts has ever given me one hearing. And I've asked for hearings in multiple ways, right? I've tried to contact the scheduler. She gives me dates for 2 months out, 90 days out. 45 days out, something like that. Something that both Morgan Heibner and the Adams law firm, they can schedule hearings with 2 days notice to talk about things like attorney's fee, right? Then when I file a motion to recuse because of all the abuses in the lower court, then Judge Brown dismisses the petitions, the motion to recuse procedurally without giving me a hearing, even a hearing, despite the serious allegations of fraud, right, against 2 courts. She doesn't give me a hearing. Then I file with the First Court of Appeals, and in 2 occasions, they have dismissed it procedurally without giving me a hearing. The common thread is that they never give me a hearing. The reason why they can give me a hearing, I mentioned it before, is because if they get me in front of a microphone, I'm gonna get all this into the record, right? And they are not going to delete it from the record. And they don't know if there might be somebody in the audience, because the courts here in the US are a public forum, right? Anybody can come into that courtroom, and they don't know if one of those people in the courtroom could be a witness, right? Planted in there by a higher entity. So they don't know, right? They can control 100% the situation. So they can get me in front, even if they have the court reporter, or if they can, they can get me in that to say things on the record, right? So that's why they have to dismiss things procedurally. But that systematic dismissal, procedural dismissal of all my motions, or just ignoring them, as the 387 thoughts, they just ignore them. That on itself is a profound violation of due process. Because how can you take, using the law, the legal means, right? How can you take somebody's child and take away all their parental rights and not even give them the opportunity to be heard? I mean, this is a constitutional violation, right? In so many ways, in different ways. So this is a document that is simple, yet it's a kill shot. Like, it's not something that could be ignored, right? Easily. Now, I have to tell you, I also realized that the process of filing this document was surprisingly very different than the process of filing the document with the First Appellate Court. It's a similar instrument. It's a petition for writ of mandamus. But I filed this thing, and it got accepted and filed by the clerk within 20 minutes, right? And everybody got served, like, but when I did it on the First Appellate Court, the 2 times, I filed, and the actual acceptance of the document took hours, several hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, right? And then all these procedural errors happen, right? Like, nobody got served, and I discussed this before. I'm not going to go over them again, but there were a lot of issues with clerical errors, okay? And I discussed this before in demo 91-2. And this is striking to see, because if you think about it, the Supreme Court of Texas is a higher court, right, relative to the First Appellate Court. So you would think that they're more busy, right, that they're dealing with more serious issues, more delicate. You would think that the response time of the clerk would be much higher, right? It's counterintuitive to see that the clerk of the Supreme Court responds so fast. Compare, and it's consistent. The response time is even faster than the 387th. It's amazing to see this, right? I think it is related to the level of control. I think the time that it takes the clerk to actually take action on a filing, it's directly proportional to how controlled that court is, how much control there is over that court. And this has to do with the metric that I developed. It's a signal, actually, that I use in the pipeline. I call it the UTL, I think, ULT signal. It stands for unreasonable lead time. And please check it out on the book. I'm not going to, but the idea is when you, and I developed this signal for the application on supply chain items. Like, if you buy something on Amazon, Amazon is usually pretty fast, right? Like, you would, in the US, you would get things the next day, right? And this is, I'm not going to get into that, but when they intercept the item to plant a box, for example, then the item takes longer to arrive. It could take a week or 2 weeks, right? Sometimes they even manufacture the item for the target. Like, I had situations in which they manufacture things for me and sold them to me via Amazon, right? And I can tell that they were manufactured especially for me, right? They custom made these items for me with a special box, right? So those items could take 10 days to arrive because they have to manufacture them, right? It's a longer process. So the same principle applies here. If a particular court is heavily under control and they want to control every single thing that happens from the moment of filing, they can't let the clerk make any decision. Right? So what has to happen, the clerk has to take the document and take it to the person that is above her within the network, right? And within the court. So the person, there must be somebody at the court that is part of the court and that is part of the network and that has a higher level of approval of a status than the clerk. So the clerk has to take the document to that person. The person reviews it. Maybe that person also has another boss within the court and within the bizarro state. So he has to take it to that. So he has levels of approvals. And this makes it so that when I file, I get the acceptance email 4 hours later, right? Because they are internally within the bizarro state. I mean, within the court, but also within the Bizarro state, right? Seeking approvals. Okay, yeah, let him do it, right? Or kill it. Don't let this pass this stage, right? So it seems like the UTL signal that I developed for detecting or flagging items that could be bought online could be applicable to this as well. But in the case of the Supreme Court of Texas, the response was immediate. Immediately, the document, minutes, it came back stamped, right? Which has never happened in any of the lower courts. To get the stamped document, first I get the email and the document is not stamped. And then eventually, right, hours later, I get the stamped document. So anyhow, it's a signal. But it's an interesting development, right? So let's see what happens there. And I'm going to talk more about the legal items in another demo, but I'm going to, stop going deep on this because I want to, redirect to the goal of this session, which is to talk about abdication. So when all this happened, right, my reaction was to file with the Supreme Court of Texas, and also I mailed a new Form 211 as I promised I would do. I promised this on demo 911. Right? And it's funny that demo happened to fall in that number. I didn't plan this, right? But it fell on that number, 911. But so I created my new Form 211, right? A new filing. I submitted a new report, and I added it to the book that I prepared for the commissioner of the IRS. And I described this book before. It's a formal disclosure to the commissioner of the IRS that includes this Form 211 that I filed. I filed it yesterday on the 26th. So you will see how this all connects, right? So when I'm preparing this document, right, I've known this for months because I have a signal. I mean, what I'm going to describe now, right? When I describe an important ranking signal that I have had for many months. And in this filing, it's evident, right? Like you can see it in this filing, and you can see, I'll show you the examples, right? So what happened was, the train of thought was that when I was preparing the Form 211, I saw the thing, and I knew it from months ago because I have a signal that computes this, right? But this triggered a thought in my mind. So let me start by showing you okay, let me start by sharing with you. I think that makes more sense. Let me start by sharing with you what is a signal, okay? So this is a signal. And please hear me out, because when I say this, you're gonna think, well, this happens a lot, but there's subtleties on this, right? If I describe the signal is it's a signal that they embed into Google Maps or other mapping systems of the PayPal mafia, right? That work online, like Google Maps, Bing Maps. They embed them everywhere. And the way the marker looks is it's co-occurrence. That's the marker, right? So these are special entities that have two characteristics that co-occur. And what the characteristics are important. One is that the entity name has a particular word that matches the second feature, which is that the street name has the same word. So for example, if I create a company, if I was part of the network, right, and they gave me a company because I harassed somebody, and to the point that I drove them to bankruptcy, and as a reward, they gave me a company, right? Because this is what they do. The most effective harassers get as a reward a company, crypto payments, things like that. So they gave me a company, and I live on Britton Ridge Drive, right? So I named my company Britton Enterprise, right? So the fact that the company is called Britton Enterprise and is located on a street called Britton Ridge Drive, that co-occurrence is the marker, okay? And you will say, well, or you might say, well, but that might be just a coincidence, right? Well, think about it, right? If I'm talking about people that are not, are not at the top of society, right? Like I'm talking people in middle class, right, or upper middle class. If you're gonna create a company, right, you are gonna name that company to something that is um, important to you, right, or that is meaningful to you, right? You're not gonna, I think, right? It's unlikely that you're gonna name the company the same as your street name because your street name could change, right? You could move to another house and then the name of the company is gonna be irrelevant. I mean, that accomplishes nothing. It seems like for people middle class or middle upper class or lower, the residency, the concept of residence is a temporary concept, right? I think that's the idea. You could change residence, right? Because you may I don't know, make a little bit more money, buy a better house, or you may get into a difficult economic situation and have to downgrade, right? And you will have to move. So tying the name of your company, especially when you're not yet successful, to the name of the street where you live right now is not a reasonable choice, right? And you will see you will see this pattern of naming the street after the company name, which is the other way to do it, right? So you first create the company is very successful, and you name the street. Like, I don't know, for example, in Google campus in California, there is a street called Google Drive, right? But well, I mean, that I can understand, right? The company is so successful that they can just name the streets whatever they want. Right? But if you are, a little guy, right, or a little girl, you're trying to start your own startup, you're probably not going to name it with the name of the street, right? But let me show you, right? Let me show you some examples of this, and you will see these people are super important, right? I mean, although society, like if you look at it from a societal point of view, you have never heard of these people. But the fact that they have this marker tells me that they're very important for the network. It's a way for them to mark them as key players in plain sight. And because they don't have societal status that is evident, like nobody knows how important these people are except the bizarro state. So, nobody recognizes it, right? But if you know what they're doing, as I do, then you can recognize it. So I'm gonna show you some examples of this, right? So if you go to the website, the spilehealthfiles.com, right? So this is the website more geared towards citizens, right? It has resources for citizens. So if you go to that website and you enter this path /IRS, it will download the book that I submitted to the IRS, right? The one that I was describing before, that is addressed directly. So if you look at the subtitle of the book, it says, "An IRS Whistleblower's Formal Disclosure to the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, Parts 1, 2, and 3." And this book is registered with the Library of Congress, and it has the Library of Congress control number 20259244729. So any citizen or any institution can go to the Library of Congress and request a copy of this book. And the electronic version of this book that has the three parts together, so the ebook has this ISBN number 978-196-92-94-518. And you can get this book on Amazon. Like if you go to Amazon, amazon.com, and you type RJ Aguiar IRS. So these are the three parts, and the prices that are selling there, I'm not making any money of those books. Those are the prices that just led, because it's 114 pages, right? That's why it's split in three parts. So printing the books is very costly, and those prices are set in a way that I don't make any money from the books. They just pay for the cost of printing the books. Okay. So if you want to buy the physical, there is one book missing. The book number 2 is not here. I'll see why. But anyhow, so those are the printed books, but the ebook is $3.99. And again, this is because the file size is big and Amazon charges for the bandwidth, right? So that price is calculated. So basically it pays for itself, right? I don't have to pay for the distribution. So this is the book, okay? That's the ISBN that I gave you, So if you want to read it on the Kindle, you'll have to pay $3.99, but you can download it from the website using the spyhealthfiles.com/IRS, and you can download exactly the same book for free. Right? You don't have to pay anything. In this case, I will pay for the bandwidth to Google. So, so this is the book, right? Let me see. Right. So in this book, I just want to walk you quickly through the structure, right? So the first relevant part of the book, like the beginning of the book, is a letter to the commissioner of the IRS, right, explaining, that I've submitted reports before that were ignored, and that I'm submitting this one with this book attached, right? So I'm going to send courtesy copies of the book to the commissioner, and it also has. So this is the document that I prepared after they denied the petition for writ of mandamus at the First Appellate Court, and that was signed by Chief Justice Terry Adams. So this letter basically explains that I am a former Google software engineer that worked in search ranking, that I'm named as the sole inventor in 2 US patents attributed to Google that they're relevant to this because the technologies I've used to decode this database that was leaked to me by Diosdado Cabello and this Venezuelan intelligence, I decoded that database using principles that are similar in, I didn't infringe the patents, but principles of information retrieval that are similar to those patents, right? And I also mentioned that I'm a recognized refugee with protected personal status under the Refugee Convention of 1951, and that was granted to me because on the basis of credible threats of persecution by this same transnational criminal organization that I'm reporting in this Form 211. So you see, and I give the IRS the same ISBN numbers and the LCCN in the Library of Congress of the book and the link to download it for free. And I'm going to send physical copies to them. So I just want to tell you the actions that I took, right? That's what I'm doing. And then after that, you can actually see the actual form that I sent to the IRS, right? And this form is designed in a way that it's impossible to ignore it, right? The same as the petition to the Supreme Court of Texas, right? If you read this form, it's impossible to ignore it for many reasons, right? But I'm not gonna go deep into this because it would take a lot of time. But the top individual in the list is Robert S. Mueller III, who was the director of the FBI for many years, and is my neighbor. I live 300 feet away, right? So, I mean, if you're the IRS and somebody is telling you, I'm reporting my neighbor, right? You can't, if I was somebody like living 5,000 miles away from Robert Mueller, you could say, well, this person might be crazy, right? But just the fact that I'm 300 feet away from his house, that should lend me certain level of credibility. Well, first of all, it's not easy to buy a house so close to a former director of the FBI, right? That alone, just the fact that I own this house should lend me, they at least have to wonder, right? Is there something here, right? But not only that, other people that I'm reported are people that had either pled guilty to charges of bribery, corruption, things like that, in front of the DOJ, or that have been convicted, and their name in this form next to Robert Mueller, right? So if you are an IRS official and you see this is something that you cannot ignore. I mean, you can ignore it, but I guess, you would be obstructing justice, and that would be obvious, right, to the FBI. So, so this was a direct consequence of them trying to trigger an audit with the IRS to harm me. So when they escalated the harassment from a state-level harassment to federal harassment, and this is described in demo 91-1. So this is the result of that. So, but I'm going to show you that signal, okay? So one of the people that have this signal is Carlton Woods, right? So look at this. This is a guy whose name is Carlton Woods. He has a company that is called Carlton Woods Associates. And his house and the company are located in a place, the street address is 1 Carlton Woods Drive, right? So you see that, right? So his name is the name of the company, which makes sense, and it's also the name of the street where the house is located and the company is located. And this is a multi-million dollars property, like I can't recall the price exactly, but yes, it's a multi-million, like this is a big player in the real estate market here in this hub. So he's part of the people that build the hub, right? The Docker hoods. Or that market them, right? Like they move the properties, right? But you see the marker, right? So the marker is him having the same word in the property name, the street name, and the company name, right? So he has it 3 times. Another key player that has this is, where is him? Somewhere around here. Let me find him. Yes, Michael Cohen, right? So you see Michael Cohen, right, who is a friend of my former partner, Angela. It's a very close friend, the same gym, right? Angela is his wife. So Michael Cohen, you can see, right? He has, and this is an amazing example, right? So first of all, he has a company called Touhi Capital. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's Touhi, okay? That's the name of the company. Now, if you look at the address of the company, it's located on a street that has the same name of the company, right? And this is a house, I mean, I know because I've been in front of this house. This is a house that it's, 300,000. It's not a top end house. Like this is an average value property, okay? But he named the company in the same way as a street, but it doesn't stop there. Then he built a 14,000 square feet mansion that has a bowling alley inside. It's a multi-million-dollar property, right? And I've talked about this property before. And the property is in a street that they've named Two Gun Way. And Two Gun Way is the name of his social media handle, right? So his social and the social media handle predates the construction of the house and the naming of the street. So the street was named after his social media handle, right? That is a signal. That is a signal. I mean, the Bizarro state has to keep a database of social media handles, right, of the important players. And when they see that his social media handle is also the name of the street, they know that this is a key player in a particular area, right? What is the thing that matches the street name is also a functional marker, right? If it's the social media if it's a social media handle, it means one thing. If it's a company name, it means another thing. But in either case, it means prominence. So he has 2 of these prominence markers in 2 of his properties, right? This is a key player. And you see him, like I met him in person because he invited me for dinner with my former partner like 2 years ago. You see this person, you don't imagine that he has this level of power, right? But he does, I can tell you that. But now, and this, well, there's another one that I want to show you, which is, sorry, one second. Which is Travis Kalanick, right? So Travis Kalanick, his house is on so the house has a name, right, in Google Maps. It's called Bellagio State. That's the name of the house. Like the house has an entity in Google Maps. And I don't want to get too deep into the technical explanation, but in Google Maps, this is a team in Google that is called MapFacts. They maintain a set of entities, right, with geographical associations. So the house of Travis Kalanick is an entity in this knowledge graph. And the name of that entity is the Bellagio State. And it's located in Bellagio Road, right? So this tells the network that the entity, that the house, I mean, that this is a key player, right? It's the same observation with the other 2 ones that I showed you. And in this list, there are others that have this marker, right? But so this is as far as I could go deeper on this topic, and I would love to because it's a technical topic, but I'm going to resist that inclination, and I'm going to stop the technical part of this here, and I'm going to transition into what is the train of thought that led me to this interesting, I think it's interesting, right? Conclusion. Um, the train of thought is, well, how do they do this, right? Is that they change really the name of the streets, or is that they change the name of the streets in Google Maps, right? Because those are two different things to do. They could change it in Google Maps and Bing Maps and all the other maps that they control, or they could change it in but you see, the more scalable way to do it is to change it in the internet companies, not in the actual property or counties, right? Or tax assessors, or to change the name of a street is a very bureaucratic, heavily bureaucratic process, right? And it would be obvious what they're doing. It's easier to change a bit in a database, right? Or a set of bytes in a database, a row, a column, right? A cell. So obviously, right, they're changing it there. And you can see that in the two-gone way, right? And let me show you that right here, right? So if you go to Google Maps, right, and you search for two-gone way, Katie, you get the house. Like, so this is the house so see, the street is supposedly called two-gone way, right? But if you click on this house, on the one next door, the street name is different. It's Dewberry Lane, right? So they rename. So what this means is they renamed the street on Google Maps, but they forgot to update the entity in MapFacts of the house next door. And this house next door is also owned by Michael Cohen. And I know that because he invited me to a birthday party of his son, and it was in that house. I'm talking about the 4239 Dewberry Lane, right? And look, this house has the empty lot marker, prominence marker, twice, right? It has one empty lot here, and it has one empty lot here, or here, right? And he controls this house, which also has the wall marker that, it's documented in the book. This photo in a street view, that it's a wall, that is a marker. And there is an important property in the Donbas region near Ukraine that is probably one of the most important properties related to the Ukraine war that has the same marker. And it's documented in the book. And this one next to it is the two-gone way, right? House that he's built, or is building or built. I don't know if it's finished. The 14,000 square feet monstrosity, right? But you see, one house has one street name, but they forgot to update the MapFacts entity on the other house, right? So this shows clearly that what they did was to manipulate the data of MapFacts, right, to create this marker. And this is important for intelligence services to understand, but beyond that, right, I want to go to a higher level of abstraction. And I don't mean to say that intelligence services are lower level, but I don't want to focus too much on the TTP, and I want to focus more on what this means, right? What are the implications of this observation? So, so I see this, right? I see that they are clearly manipulating Google Maps data and Bing's maps and all the other maps, right? And they do it. I know how they do it. Like, they do it at a higher level of aggregation, but at the end, what they're doing is manipulating the mapping services of these private companies that they control. So, this led me to ask myself the question. The question I asked myself was, when did all this happen? I mean, when did everything went wrong with the internet, right? To lead to this point of manipulation, right? Where they can change the reality of the land. I mean, in the digital version of it, right? And, so it occurred to me to ask my mother that question, right? I mean, not that question, but I asked her a question that could let me understand this. So I called my mom and I asked her, I have the call recorded somewhere. I asked her, like, how did people find places in Venezuela in 1985? And she, I asked her the question. I put her a situational scenario to her, proposed a situational scenario. I asked her, imagine that you were going from Maracaibo to this other city that you've never been to, and you want to go to a specific store in the downtown of the city. How did you find that store in 1985? Her answer was, well, we would carry maps. We would always be chasing these maps that they sold at gas stations. That and I didn't remember this because I was, a small child. But she said, we would be chasing these maps, getting these maps in the gas stations, and all the gas stations would carry these maps printed in paper, like it was like a foldable thing that you couldn't fold, right? And each gas station would have the maps of the area surrounding the gas station, right? And then she goes on to tell me, well, I don't know who printed. I asked her, right, and who produced these maps? And she told me, well, I don't know who printed them. But then I said, I'm just trying to replay the conversation for you, right? So you see where this is going. And I said, well, but okay, forget who printed them, but who produced the data? And then she goes on to explain that at the time there were different ministries in Venezuela. One was the Ministry of, and I'm going to translate the names. The translations might not be perfect, but one is was the Ministry of Public Infrastructure. The other one was the Ministry of Transportation, and the other one was something that they called in Spanish. I don't know the translation to that, but it's called, at least in Venezuela, I'm going to say it in Spanish, and I apologize for that. It's called El Catastro, okay? And I think from what she described, it sounds a lot like a county. It sounds a lot like the equivalent to Fort Bend County, right? Like a local government that it's below the state level government. So these were the people that were responsible for the GIS data, measuring where things start, the terrains, the coordinates, the perimeter. Defining all those things was the responsibility of the government, and assigning the names to the streets and the numbers to the houses, right? So I thought, well, obviously, this is something, right? Then my question evolved to ask myself, in what point in history is that this mode of operating a society changed and was replaced by look it up in Google Maps, right? Because it's a fundamental shift from having a government do these important things like assigning street names or house numbers to having a private company like Google. I mean, Google, I used to work for Google, and I love the company. I love my coworkers. I love the environment. But, you have to call things the way they are, right? It is a responsibility that seems to me like should not be delegated to a private entity for obvious reasons, because somebody could do this, right? They could start changing the data to fit their own agenda, whatever that agenda is, right? So the hypothesis that forms in my mind at this point, and this happened in the last few days, right? That forms, and this is the reason why I haven't given this demo, because I've been thinking about this, and sometimes you have to let things simmer, right? But the thought is, it feels like there was abdication, right? I'm going to talk about the Venezuelan government, right, of 1985. Like, Diosdado Cabello was a child, a kid, right? He was in university. Like, he did not do this, right? But at some point between, 1992 and 2000, the government of Venezuela abdicated this responsibility and delegated it to Google Maps. I'm talking about Venezuela because this is what, my mom told me that happened in Venezuela. I don't know what was the reality in other countries, right? I don't know how it was done in the US in 1995, right? But I imagine, right, I can extrapolate the idea, and I think I see what happened, right? What happened was the world had a way of doing things, right? In this area of naming streets and the limiting perimeters of terrain and marking things on the planet, right? And it had a way to do it that was fragmented, right? Because each county in Venezuela is different. It was controlled by a different political party. They may do things, and there was no software at that point. In 1985, there was no software to do this. All this was done in paper, right? So they had different procedures. It was a fragmented process. If you look at it from the higher level of the entire country, and even more fragmented if you look at it at a higher level from the entire planet, right? If you think about all the countries and all the counties inside each country, you would result with having thousands of different ways of doing GIS, right? Of doing geospatial mapping and these kind of things. So what happened was, then there came the PayPal mafia, right? With their shiny object, the technology. And they came up with a way to do this at planetary scale in a standardized way, right? Which beat easily all the procedures that all the other counties in all the countries could have to do GIS. And the world adapted the technology proposed by the PayPal mafia because its simplicity, because it was easy to use, because it solved the problem, right? But this created a weakness because now we're all dependent on the platforms that provide this technology. And if an entity like the Communist Party of China controls the commercial entity behind the scenes, then the Communist Party of China is controlling the GIS data for the entire planet. Right? Imagine the level of control that gives to the Communist Party of China. And I'm talking about the Communist Party of China because Xi Jinping is the recognizable individual, right? But there is decades of ideology standing behind him, right? So this is a group of individuals, really. It's not one individual, right? So I see this, right? And I say, well, this is where it probably went wrong. The moment governments around the globe abdicated the responsibility to provide GIS services to its citizens and started relying instead on Google Maps and Bing Maps and etc., right? And MapQuest and whatever, there were different stages of adoption in this process, but at the end, this is what happened, right? And then I start to think, okay, well, if this is the Take All Roads TTP that I described in demo 91-2. Because I know how they operate, right? If they're going to do one thing in one avenue, they're going to do it in multiple avenues. They're not just going to take the GIS and I mean, this is kind of a test to see if this hypothesis holds, right? They are not going to do this in one place only, right? If this is really a TTP, they're going to deploy it in multiple places, in multiple verticals. We call them in the internet or the software industry, right? So I start thinking, well, where else could they have applied this? The second example of this that came to my mind was the taxi cabs. So when Uber came up, Travis Kalanick, supposedly, right? I don't think it was like, he's a frontman for the Communist Party of China, right? When Travis Kalanick came in the US with this idea of Uber, right, supposedly, and they started doing the ride-hailing apps, right? And he developed the Hail app to, kill or try to kill Lyft, right? And this is documented in Gonzalez v. Uber in California, right? It's a lawsuit. Read it, please. When Kalanick comes up with this idea, remember, and at this point, I was older, like I was already of age. And I remember the scenario in this other situation. Like, this is not 1985 to me anymore. This I can't relate to, right? I remember the taxi industry was heavily regulated in every single country. You would have to go through an exam and get a certification, and then you have to pay for a license to get the cab, to get the license to operate the cab, right? And the cabs were standardized, and they had a number printed on the door, right? So it was a system designed for accountability, right? But what happened was Uber came along, Travis Kalanick came along with this shiny object again, right? It's a more efficient system. You can do it from your phone. You can get a cab from anywhere. You can make money using the app. If you want to drive a taxi, you don't need to go to the city hall to apply for a license, right? It was more convenient. It solved a lot of problems. But, and this is the but, it bypassed what the world was doing for, for decades, right? I don't know for how long the taxi industry existed, to be honest, but I imagine during its entire existence, it had regulations and licensing, right? And they came with this thing and they love it. And because they have this network that they have, with the crypto payments, I imagine they use all the resources of the network to abolish legislation, right, regarding the taxi industry. And this resulted in the extinction of the regulated taxi industry, right? Uber took over. But it's the same. It's abdication of government responsibilities that had been responsibilities of all the governments of all the world before this point. And technology caused the abdication or justified the abdication. Yeah, you see, right? Now, in the case of Uber, it's a dangerous situation, more dangerous, because think about it. If you are the Chinese, the Communist Party of China, and you want to insert intelligence agents in other countries, the easiest way to do it is to pass them as Uber drivers and install in their cars, in the ceiling, the Chinese espionage machine, right? I am curious to understand what percentage of Uber cars in the US have the espionage machine installed versus the non-Uber cars, right? That's an interesting metric that somebody should compute. But think about it. If you're the Communist Party of China and you want to insert thousands, like all you have to do is bring them, I don't know, claiming asylum, whatever, right? And make them apply for an Uber driver ID, right? And then that's it. They don't have to go to City Hall to get a license to drive a cab, right? Nobody is going to inspect the cab to see if it has an espionage machine inside, right? So that's the risk, that's the problem with the abdication of that responsibility, right? That it opens the door for a foreign actor to exploit at massive scale. And nobody will see it because there is no inspections of the taxi cabs. There's no number printed on the cab anymore. Now they look all the same, right, from outside. So it's a dangerous, dangerous situation. And I say, well, I found 2 examples. Let me think, is there another example? Well, the obvious one is WebMD, right? The dissemination of medical information has been always, for more than a century, the responsibility of a government. But now, if you feel sick, you go to WebMD, right? To look up what medicines to buy. Okay? I mean, this is serious, right? Like, this is a government, or all the governments really, right? Abdicating the responsibility for putting life-saving or life-threatening information about health in front of their citizens in favor of a private company that is a technology platform controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, the Communist Party of China, right? The CPC. It's a serious thing, right? But at this point, right, I have to, look back at my 3 observations and think, okay, but what is the common thing here? What is that they achieve? Well, how was this achieved in 3 different verticals so quickly in parallel, right? Well, I think the common thread is that the 3 systems were weak, were non-performant. The performance was poor, right? So, of course, if you have a system that is performing poorly, and you bring a new shiny object that outperforms it, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the worse the performance is of the thing you want to replace with the Chinese technology, as if you lower the performance, then the delta is higher, right? It looks like the Chinese solution is better. If you intentionally lower the performance of the competing let's call it product or computed platform controlled by the government in reality, right? So what they have to do is maximize the delta, right? So it looks so much better that it's a no-brainer to adopt the technology. So this led me to see why is that they're focused on controlling the departments of transportation, the CDC, right, and the counties, right? Because then they can make sure that their solutions outperform the government solutions, right? So it's really a two-pronged attack. That's why it's important for them to insert as many agents as they can in all the levels in these specific verticals in the government, right? To make sure. So, for example, I remember that when the Uber thing happened, that they started lobbying for this, right? I remember there were a lot of, and I actually used the pipeline to look, historic data on the news articles, and there were a lot of articles about how expensive it was to. I mean, I'm talking about online news, right? How expensive it was to get a taxi cab license in New York. And there are articles that say that it costed $250,000 and that there was a lot of corruption, that people would, sell their, I think they call it medallions or medallions. I don't know. To be honest, I don't have the jargon of that industry. But I think they're called medallions, right? They were called medallions. So in the articles, they were saying that there was a corruption ring and they were like selling these medallions at $250,000 and that there were people that had 10 medallions. So they were intentionally making the situation worse, right? Of that it really needed to be, right? So when Uber came along with the shiny object, it would be a no-brainer, right? We have to use Uber, right? There's no need for this regulation of this industry anymore, right? The abolition of regulation is the goal, right? Because regulation is what protects these strategic verticals, and these are strategic verticals because well, this is obvious, right? Like if you can change what is on a map, right? If you can change the location of a house, right, and everybody thinks the house is in another place, if you can change the number of the house, I mean, this has serious national security implications, right? How can anything be auditable if they have the power to do this from China, right? But after this, I say, well, is there any other example? Yes, the most shocking example is the abdication of the responsibility on currency, right? Before the PayPal mafia, we all use paper money, right? I don't recall when is the last time that I had a paper bill in my hands. I can't recall. In fact, the other day, somebody came to help me to assist me change a tire, and I didn't have money to give them as a tip because I don't carry cash, right? And this is another example, right? Before the PayPal mafia existed, it was a big thing among all the governments of the world to print and maintain currency. And this just disappeared at some point, right? Now it's all digital currency. And the natural evolution of that, of course, is crypto, because it escalates it from control over currency to control over the entire financial system, right? So they have now a parallel financial system based on crypto, right? This is even more serious. But let's start with the currency. So before, countries had to print money in paper, right? And they kept the serial numbers in the database, and there was records. It was traceable, right? When the money exchanged hand, it was traceable because the serial numbers are traceable, right? But then they made the payment system so efficient, so easy to use, right? Online payments and all that, that nobody carries cash anymore, right? And then the only people that can really, trace the transactions without, intervention from investigative authorities are these private entities. So in a way, what is happening really is that these private entities, and I'm talking about the payment processors, right? The online payment processor. These private entities have control over the currency systems of the entire planet, right? That's what's happening. And in the process, they charge a 3% fee that has been, constant 3% for 20 years, 25 years, right? Since 2000, since X.Corp was founded. So it seems serious, right? That they are controlling the currency flow and the accountability of that flow of the entire planet, and taking 3% cut in the process. Um, but again, it's because there was abdication, right? Because we all, and I'm not blaming the government, right? This is something that we all did. We, because the shiny object was so much better, we all decided collectively, unconsciously, right? Without knowing really that there was an agenda behind. I mean, if there had not been an agenda of control, which is what they're doing, right? It would have been a good move, right? Technology would have been a good thing, right? But it's being used as a method of control and coercion, right? And you can see that in the database that they leaked to me, right? Um, so that's the pattern, right? The pattern is the two-pronged attack by making the government systems weaker and perform, badly, and at the same time bring a technology solution that solves all those problems and more, and make us adopt those solutions, which then over time makes the government dependency without, right? They don't have a purpose, right? Because they took the purpose using this technology, right? And then the government dependency becomes just something that is there, but it doesn't really do anything meaningful, right? In that sense, in that area. So it's a way to achieve control, right? So you see, like, and I think I'll keep thinking about this, right? I'm sure I'll find other examples. Because as I said, it's take all roads, right? Like they're not going to leave roads that they could take this way open. But having found 4, glaring examples of this in just, a few hours that I thought about this, tells me that it's, that's the TTP, right? That's exactly the TTP. Of course, if I mean, the 4 are concerning, right? All of the 4 are matters of national security, not for the U.S. alone, for every single country. And if you, and I don't mean to overstep, I'm just a little guy trying to understand this, right? But I also, when I think of these things, I also think, okay, what could be the solution? Okay, the solution is to take all these areas back, right? Payment processing, this is something that has to be done by the government. It can be done, well, I mean, one way is to break the monopolies, because the problem also is that they have monopolies on declares. Sorry, the time. They have these undeclared monopolies, right? And because they have all the payment processing companies, right? They appear to be independent companies, but they in reality are all controlled by the Communist Party of China. So, so they control the entire financial system that way. So one solution is to break the monopolies, right? But I don't know. I'm dubious about that because that is hard to enforce, right? They could find another way to communicate covertly and still maintain an undeclared monopoly, right? And it would lead to the same situation. If I was asked the question, how would you solve this problem? I would say, I would take back these responsibilities and assign them to the government. Payment processing, this is something that has to be done by the government, obviously, right? And you could make that, well, but it's not the business of a government. But or it would be too costly. It won't be costly, right? Because in fact, it will save money, right? Because I mean, if it's a profitable business to them, right? By charging a 3% fee to the point that they can cover the operational expenses and still have money to harass 98% of the planet. Well, a government could do this and charge a lower fee if the operational cost is an issue, right? But I can tell you as an engineer, the operational cost of this is negligible. It's very small, right? Because it doesn't cost much to run a system like PayPal. I could run that thing from my house. It's not, it's not rocket science. They're not doing search. They're not doing, it's just saving transactions in a database, right? So the government, I think, right? If anybody asks my opinion, I would suggest the government should take control over this area, right? And start processing the payments as they process other things, right? The government process transactions for citizens, right? They are not delegated to a private company controlled by a set of or a set of private companies controlled by the same group of individuals, right? That would solve the problem, right? Um, and that of course you will have the problem that different countries will mean different processors, but that is in a way good because that fragmentation fosters compliance, right? Because if you have two countries that have two separate entities doing payments for their citizens and somebody wants to send payments overseas, then the two entities have to communicate. And because they're separate entities in two separate governments, it would make it very hard for there to be collusion, right? Because it would mean, there could be collusion, for example, between Venezuela and Cuba, right? Because they're very tight, right? But it's difficult to see that there could be collusion in the payment systems between Venezuela and the US, right? So these will foster compliance. And at the end, the money has to go somewhere, right? So it would be a system much harder to attack. Fragmentation, in these cases, is a desirable property. It's not the enemy, it's the friend. Right? Because fragmentation makes it hard to do what they do. What they do is always based on attacking the aggregators. And I have a session prepared to talk about this, but I haven't been able to give it because it's a long technical session. But the attack, the vector of attack is always the aggregator. They always go for the aggregator. So by creating these undeclared monopolies, what they're really doing is creating a huge aggregator that they can use to do whatever they need to do to anybody. Right? So fragmentation is actually a desirable property. So I think more on a architecturally way of thinking, I think we need to, what I would propose, that we reverse back a little bit on that globalization of technology and start thinking more on localized solutions that cooperate with each other, right? So the payment system of the US has to be compatible with the payment system of all the other 180 countries, or how many they are built at the end, right? Like compatibility is needed. But globalization in these things is not needed and it's not desirable because that globalization in technology implies control through the monopoly, right? Through the monopolic control of the market. So control of the individuals via the monopolic control of that market. And that is something that is not desirable, as you can obviously see in these 4 examples. So this is really what I think. This is me debugging what happened in the past, right? Even when I was, in 1985, I was a kid. I wasn't aware of this, but it seems to me like this is what happened. Different governments abdicated crucial responsibilities of services that they were providing to their citizens in favor of technology provided by the Communist Party of China. Yes. Yes, so I think I'm gonna close the session here to keep it, focused and not diluted with other things. And yes, I'll see you on the next one. Okay, thank you for your time, and I'll see you on the next one.